Thank you for tuning in to the Narrative Mindset Podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, then when you get time, go view earlier episodes so that you can get a general understanding, or should I say, a general vibe of the podcast. So I'm going to continue talking about me and my family. This episode will be about my mom and dad's family. What was it like having a mom with 6 sisters and 1 brother? It was a little bit different because you did not really, when you have women, women tend to be around their sisters and visit more family than guys. So with women, the kids end up knowing each other a little bit better because they're around each other a whole lot more. When you have guys are around friends more than they're around family. So with guys, the kids tend to look at whoever their father was friends with, their kids, as more closer family like. So that's the only difference between men and women. I had favorite aunties. My Aunt Bertie, she was my favorite auntie. I used to go over some of my other aunt's house. My Aunt Peter in Alamo Hills out of Kalamazoo. She was another one of my favorite aunties. Some of them I really didn't see that much. My Aunt Cookie, I really didn't see her too much, but she was, again, an auntie that I wasn't really my favorite because I really didn't see her too much. So, just because we didn't go over there a whole lot. I'm not sure if there were some issues with her and my mom and their general growing up together or something like that. I'm just not sure. I was closest to my cousins, uh, my Aunt Bertie's children, Laquita, Toya, and Michael, and mostly Laquita and Toya because I didn't have an interest in sports. So I used to run with my 2 female cousins. My brother, he was a sports fanatic, so he ran with their brother, Michael. A lot of people thought that I was going to be gay. Nothing wrong with that, but a lot of people thought I was going to be gay because I ran with 2 girls. I was just with them because I didn't have an interest in sports. So I wasn't just going to sit at home and whatever. So we used to, run up and down the street with her and some other kids up the street or whatever. Our family reunions were always a big thing because when you have a matriarch in the family, that's usually the center point for family reunions because that's a reason for everybody to get together and somehow it's a good enough reason to put off whatever other establishments or appointments that you have, because that matriarch is so important that you're making plans way ahead of time just to say, I got to be here on, on Thanksgiving or Christmas or Mother's Day or whatever, and you already know the rest of the whole family is going to be there. So it was definitely a good it was definitely a good gathering. My Some of my mom's siblings played more of a second parent role. Some of them didn't really get involved too much. They just kind of lightly uh did some parenting, because respect was always a known thing. And then you had other aunties that really did, the ones that were closer, they really did, stepping in, and they were more of a parent role because they were closer to us than some of the other aunties. But when the other aunties did come around, they were also they knew that, respect was a big thing. So, they would say something more lightly, more lighter than the closer uh aunties. My mom's brother, she had one brother. He didn't really stand out being the only boy with six sisters. He didn't really stand out because I don't know, he wasn't really around a whole lot. We knew Uncle Ricky, and Uncle Ricky was cool, but like I said, as a guy, he was always, out whatever doing his own thing. And then after a while, he had moved uh to uh Florida. So he would come around sometimes when he was in town, and we'd see him down at his sister's house, my Aunt Lori. But it was only when he would come visit Albion. Yeah, I think my mother's upbringing did have a a influence on how she raised us. That's just a byproduct. Her upbringing was anybody's upbringing is all they know. So it's all they know how to pass on. You can't pass on something you really don't know. You can only pass on what you know. All you know is your upbringing. So, yes, my mom's upbringing was had a big influence on us. She didn't raise us exactly the way she was raised, but she kind of retrofitted how she was raised, and that was the way she raised us. It was it loud and full of energy when the family got together. Well, it was fun, and it was more structured than today's family get-togethers are. It was, we would pull up, and we already knew that we would go in, say hi to Medea, that was my grandmother, and say hi to all my aunties, and then each age group went off and did their own thing. The adults were together, the we were together, little kids were together, the smokers and card players, they were together, the the men, whatever they were together, we would my Aunt Lori, her house was a party house, which is up the street from my grandmother's house. So we used to always go down to her house after we said hi to my mom and my aunties, and they could look up the street and see us. So it was okay for us to leave out of there and head straight down to uh, my cousin's house. So it was always a lot of people, and it was definitely fun. Do you ever see your mom lean on your sisters for support while raising you? Uh, I didn't really see her lean on her sisters for support, but I know that uh, her and my Birdie, who passed, I think who she was closest to because they lived next door to us. I believe that she did lean on her for support, obviously, because they lived right next door to each other. So, I'm pretty sure they had plenty of conversations about what was going on between, each other's kids and any advice or, hey, what do you think about this? Back and forth uh, between the two. Do you feel like growing up around a big extended family shaped how you see family now? Of course I do. I believe that growing up around a big extended family, like everybody did, I think, you know, with a matriarch had an influence because it was a family structure that distributed respect, and it was, your, Medea, she could say something to her grandkids and, you know, overrode the mother, overrode the mother and uh, whoever else. So it didn't really matter. It was what she said. And the mother or whatever just kind of said, okay, as opposed to today, it's like, the grandmother really can't override the the parents usually in most cases. So yeah, I do think that yeah, I do think it had a huge effect on shaping today's family. On your dad's side, what was it like knowing he never knew his father? It was different for my father because I don't know, I guess it uh showed how a person who doesn't know his father, it gave me a firsthand look at how a person who doesn't know his father, how it can affect him and the way he sees life and values. And that was, something that I got to see firsthand, through my father's whole entire life. And my mother also explained it to me, and it definitely had an impact on me raising my kids. My dad, father not really being around, uh, I think it affected a lot of how he raised me and my brother because it wasn't something that, when you don't have a father around, uh, you don't know you don't know how to raise kids. You figure out how to be a man on your own, and he figured it out from going to Vietnam and from the whole tough guy era and everything like that. So yeah, I believe it uh, it did affect how he raised me and my brother, and he had I got some other brothers that I kind of know or really don't know whatever. Did he ever talk about what it was like growing up without a father? No, my father never spoke about not having, not knowing his father. He only, he only talked about his stepfather, Odie, who raised him and was the only grandfather that I knew. So no, my father never talked about uh, how not having a father, uh, affected him. Did he find father figures in other people? I'm not sure. No, I'm really not sure. It didn't really seem like it. In the time that I knew my father, it didn't really seem like he found father figures in other people. I think, I think I kind of want to say that he used alcoholism and the womanism and cheating and all of that as somewhat of a coping mechanism. Did he make sure that you didn't feel the same absence? He tried to. He tried to somewhat. He gave it his best shot, I think. Because like I said, my father was a cheater. My father he was an alcoholic. He was, a womanizer. After they got divorced, after him and my mom got divorced, he was always there to, if my mother called him, because he was like one of those guys that was like, he wasn't no good as a husband, but if she needed him, he was like he wanted to be that guy that she called on somewhat. So he was around sometimes, but I guess he tried to do everything that he could real lightly to make sure that that uh me and my brother didn't feel the same absence. But it was a very light effort, very light effort, very light effort. You know, I knew my father, and don't get me wrong, having a father that that I knew I could call. He wasn't home, he was alcoholic and all this other stuff, but at least I knew that I could call my father or whatever. Do you think that not knowing his dad made him tougher or more sensitive? Well, I think of course it made him more sensitive in a sense that he didn't know his father. As far as being tougher, maybe from anger, being angry that you don't know who your father is, then I would say yes, because usually in those kind of situations, a person tries to lash out on everybody else because of an underlying issue, which in this case was him not knowing his father. Did you ever see your dad struggle with that missing piece of his life? No, I don't think I did. I think my mother she kind of recognized it because she knew him when he was, I never knew my dad when he was, you know, before he went to Vietnam. And she said that after he came back from Vietnam, he was a totally different person, which I can understand why. But she could tell you that, what kind of person he was and how he went from being a nice, cool guy to being this angry, alcoholic and all this other stuff. So I never saw it, but my mother did. Did your family ever talk about who his real father was? They never talked to me about it, but my mother did mention it from time to time. And me being a curious person that I am, I would ask, well, who was his dad? And I would ask a bunch of questions. And I tried to look up who his father was, but I could never find I couldn't find the records of his father. But my dad, my mother, she did talk about who my father was. And I think my aunt Charlene, she might have mentioned it a few times because, I never knew until they kind of brought it up, in various quick times. Then I started asking questions about it because I wanted to know who he was. So yes, did your dad's siblings fill in some of the gaps for him? Absolutely not. And again, here's another comparison with women and with men. You got to remember that women, they go around each other more than men. So therefore, and women are more sensitive than men. Women are more open to expressing their feelings and what might be going on and problems, especially with their sister. Men, we hold it all in. So therefore, men can be struggling and you'll never know it. And they hardly ever come around, anybody but whoever the guys that they run with, when they do come around, they don't really talk about it. So no, not saying that my dad's siblings were, not saying they were any less of men, but they didn't fill in the gaps for him, knowing that he was, he was who he was. He was an alcoholic. He was a womanizer. He was, cheater, whatever. And they probably didn't say anything because half of them was probably the same thing. Not everything, but they were probably, one or two of the same things. So do you feel like he overcompensated in some ways to be present for you? Uh, I don't see it. I don't think he did. I mean, maybe when I was really young, me and my brother were little kids. I remember him buying us a brand new guitar, and I think it was the guitar, and I believe it was a pinball machine. But we were way too little to even use them. So I think in that particular time, maybe he did overcompensate a little bit at that particular time. But in any other instance, I don't see that he overcompensated that I can remember. You mentioned you barely knew your mother's father. What do you remember? What do you remember about him? Well, my mother's father, Robert Harper, I might have known him when I was when I was a little kid, maybe. But at least as far as anything besides that, I don't remember uh, spending enough time with him to really say, you know, I knew him. I remember being in. Uh, he was from Battle Creek, and I remember being in Battle Creek. I remember uh, being over there with my cousins. I also remember um, just certain little pictures of things that were in Battle Creek, but it wasn't enough to say that I really knew him like I knew my other grandparents. I remember being over my other grandparents, being several times doing stuff. The bus there, he turned into a camper and this, that, and another. I can say I really knew them. My mother's father, I don't really recall a whole lot of stuff that I can put together to say that I really knew him. I may have met him from time to time, and I might have knew him maybe when I was a kid. I just don't remember. Do you recall what he looked like and sounded like? I don't remember what he sounded like. I do remember what he looked like. I don't remember where he lived or uh, I do remember one time, I think we were up the street from his house, and my cousins on my dad's side, they were, I think, a couple houses down the street, and they were doing something that they didn't want me to see, and I was real nosy, and they ended up going over there, and I believe that was up the street from my grandfather's house, so we was running up and down the street or whatever. So I do remember that, I think, but that's the only thing that I really remember. I don't remember what he sounded like. Was he around much when you were growing up? Not that I remember. I don't remember him being around. He might have been around maybe when I was a kid, maybe a few times. But and my mother, as far as I can remember, my mother always brought us over there. I don't remember him being at home and him coming over or whatever. And him and my grandmother were divorced, so it was a little bit different. So I can't really recall that, and that was a little bit different. Was he around much when you were growing up? Not that I remember. Maybe when I was a kid, he may have been around. Uh, like I said, my mother was took us over there. I may have spent some time with him, but but I don't really remember much. I'm not gonna say none, but I spent some time over there. It may have been more time than I can remember because I was so little. I just don't really remember the whole thing. My mom never really told me any stories about him. I think I might have heard maybe a story or two from some of my aunties, but my mother really never told me any stories about him. She never really talked about it unless she, real quick, well, this was my father and that was it. But no, never any actual stories about him. Or did you feel the absence of not having that grandfather figure? Yeah, I actually did because I used to wonder, why why these other kids, I guess with my cousins or whoever, I'm not sure who they were, but it was like, okay, uh, why do they get to call my grandfather, and why are they so close to him and I'm not? So, yes, I did feel the absence. You always feel the absence of a figure because it leaves some information, that you're curious about that's not there, because they're absent. So it makes you wonder, who were they? What kind of person were they? Like, what kind of stories am I missing? What kind of person were they? It just sparks a lot of curiosity with that person missing. And the absence, it, the absence affects the way you move and the decisions you make and other things. You think your life would have been different if you had had a close relationship with him? Yeah, I think it would have been a little bit different. I'm not sure in a positive or a negative way. It just depends on what kind of person he was. But it would have allowed me to at least take that part of the information and and use it in my daily life decisions, or it would have given me somebody to to talk to. And when I was thinking about a decision, it would have gave me a memory to reflect on as something that he would have said. And it would have helped me make either a better or worse decision that I don't know because I didn't know him. Did your mom and he and your grandmother stay together? No, my grandfather and my grandfather and my grandmother divorced before I was even born. So I'm not sure what the reason was or whatever, but they divorced before I was born. My mother, she knew about it, but I never knew anything about it. Was there ever a reason he wasn't as present in your life? I don't really think there's ever a really good reason. There are reasons when a person is not present in your life, but I don't think in his case, I don't really think there was a reason. You know, I think that I think he could have at least made phone calls, or he could have sent for us and we could have went over there. We could have we're out, he lived in Battle Creek, so we had to pass by Battle Creek to get to my grandmother's house, who we were always at. So we would have been glad to swing by there and say, hey, you know, spend a little time over there, or whatever. Do you wish you had gotten the chance to know him better? Well, of course I do. Of course, I wish I had knew my grandfather better. I wish I had knew both of my grandfathers, my original grandfathers, better. Even though my step grandfather was a great example of uh of of what a man should be. But of course, I wish I had known uh my grandfather. I wish I'd have known everybody that I didn't get a chance to know, you know. Do you ever feel curious about him as you got older? Yeah, curiosity is a natural thing because, it's that missing piece that you wonder about. And I'm already a curious person, so but just curious is a natural instinct. Curiosity is a natural instinct. On the other hand, you said you had a great relationship with your dad's stepdad. What was he like? Oh man, my grandfather Odie was, if you ask me, he was the definition of a grandfather. We go out to his house. He had a German Shepherd that would tear you to pieces if you tried to touch us. He wouldn't bite us, but he would tear you apart if you touched us. He lived on a farm on the outskirts of Albion. Uh, it had some old tractors out back, a bus out back, basically a junkyard out back. We used to go over his house. We go in there, say hi, put everything up. We was out there in the fields, just doing whatever, finding stuff, climbing on stuff, all kinds of stuff. So, and like I said, he had a bus that he turned into a camper, which was you know, went camping, all kinds of stuff. And I think it was other stuff that I sometimes I can't remember, but yeah, he was to me uh, the very definition of a grandfather. Yeah, did I call him? Did you call him grandpa? Yes, absolutely. He definitely deserved that because he was the only grandfather that I knew, and he deserved that title of grandpa. Was he more of a mentor or just a loving presence? I think number one, he was a loving uh, person. I mean, the example of a loving grandparent. I never saw him upset. Um, and I think even dealing with my father, I think he did a great job with my father, being a stepfather. And I think the mentorship was just a byproduct of him because he was just who he was, and you got the mentorship just off of his vibe, off of him being a man and off of him paying the bills and off of him, having them old rough hands, and off of him having the the coveralls on and the dog and the bus turned into a camper and all this other kind of stuff. My grandmother, she was always played the woman's role. So, you just got that manhood just from his presence, the mentorship just from his presence. What are some specific lessons you learned from him? I think had I have listened to him, I just learned uh, he was an example of what a man should be, you know. And it was just like I said, it was a memory of things we did with him that I can refer to, to apply to my own life or my own decisions, because I didn't know any better is never an excuse that I can use, because I had too many uh, figures that I could refer to. I was around too many manly figures. What are some specific lessons you learn from him? I'm not sure if I just answered that question, but it was just how to be a man. Did you ever forget he wasn't your dad's biological father because of how close you were? Well, I didn't learn that my father didn't know his father until later in life. So my entire childhood and upbringing, I mean, you just didn't, in the era I grew up in, you didn't question that kind of stuff. You didn't ask those kind of questions. You stayed in a child's place, and you did what kids do. You didn't question adults about things of that nature. And even if the, the only time that you felt comfortable even asking questions like that is when they were directly telling you about it. And then you had to, wait for a clear, absolute 100% payout to to ask the question while they were talking about it, talking directly to you, because you also didn't get in grown folks' conversations when they were talking to somebody else. But I never knew that wasn't his father until I got older. So, but I never, it just didn't, in my eyes, he was my dad's father, so there was never anything to forget. And when I found out, I was old enough to understand it. That he stepped in fully as a father figure for your dad. Absolutely. Absolutely. He was, I don't know my dad's dad, but I think that, my dad, my dad's dad, he would have had a hard road to follow to, to, uh, compete against my father's stepfather, because my father's stepfather, like I said, Odie, he was, you know, the man, bring home all the bills, fix everything, all this other stuff. My grandmother, she, you know, he come in, whatever she, dinner be ready in a minute, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was definitely a a hard road to follow after him. Do you think the bond with him filled the gap of not knowing your other grandfather? Absolutely. 1000%, because he was, I think, as far as I'm concerned, he was what a stepfather should be. He was a loving grandfather who never once, you know, said anything about being a stepfather. You're not my grandchildren. Never treated us like we weren't his grandchildren. Everything that I remember him doing was done with I'm the man. I am the man of the house. You know, with that kind of position, and not, it wasn't overbearing. It was just an unsaid thing. He didn't say I'm the man of the house. He just was the man in the man's position with no argument. And he treated, as far as I know, all of us, me, with love. Did he support you in ways that stood out when you look back now? Uh, he, I guess I could say, I mean, I never asked him for any money or uh, things of that nature. I never asked for his opinion. But I can say that as far as, if you look at support from a stance of him being who he was, and I'll have those memories forever that I can recall on, and him just being himself, and letting that aura, uh just you soaking in that whole aura, then yes, he did support me in a huge way that stood out. Do you think he shaped your values? Absolutely, 100%. 100%, because of the fact that he was the man, as far as I'm concerned. No, absolutely no question. You know, rough hands, paid the bills. My grandmother, as far as I'm concerned, did what women should do or should be able to do. And, she was, I believe she was a homemaker, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not sure what, uh, in their younger life, what, what happened or what went on. Was he strict, gentle, funny? How would you describe him? I would describe him as very gentle, very loving, and everything that he did, as far as I'm concerned, was done with love. Everything he said, everything he did, everything he tried to teach you was always with love. It was never I don't remember him getting attitude about anything. You also mentioned your mom's mom. What was your relationship like with her? Well, my mother's mother, Medea, my grandmother, my relationship with her was great. She was my grandmother. She was, I had a different opinion about her than my mother did, because, she was my mom's mom. So my mother knew her when she was young and could get around and could, you know, was, 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 uh, was a force to be reckoned with. I knew her when she was old, and she was a grandmother, and she tell us stories and stuff like that. Uh, Uh, I do remember that she used to love to talk. She loved to talk. She would just, she would talk you to death about stuff you didn't know about, stuff you didn't care about, stuff you didn't want to know about, and you didn't have to say a word and she would talk you to death. But that was Medea. I loved my grandmother, and it was so refreshing to just to sit there and soak in all that knowledge, and that's what I love about my elders. Is you can, I mean, you're just anxious to get around them and sit there and soak up the knowledge that they have to give. Those are the best parts. But my relationship with my grandmother was great. Did you spend a lot of time at her house? Absolutely. At one time I was there every summer, and she lived right up the street from my in-laws, so we used to be up and down the street all the time. So we spent a lot of time there. Holidays, uh, you know, at summers, sometimes definitely Mother's Day, we were always over there. Was she more nurturing or more of a disciplinarian? She was a light disciplinarian, but nothing too offhand. Now, if you ask my mother, then yeah, she was a huge disciplinarian, but as far as when we came along, no, she wasn't a disciplinarian. It was like real light, real light. She was saying like really, really light. So, what was your favorite memory with her? Let me see. What can I remember? I don't know. I mean, there were so many that I can only remember when she used to tell me about baseball games because she loved baseball. I can only remember when she would tell me about baseball games, uh, uh, as well as all the other stuff that she used to tell us. Did she share stories about Alabama or family history? Uh, she might have said it because, like I said, she would just, you could sit there and say absolutely nothing, and she would talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. So she could have said something about a family member. I just wasn't listening. I was just giving her the respect of being there and just soaking up her and letting her, you know, you know, giving her somebody to expel that energy in it and somebody to talk to and somebody to tell to gossip with and tell stories about and all of that type of stuff. Did you pass down traditions that stuck with you? Uh, Maybe not a whole lot that I can really honestly say. I think that what do you call it? The byproduct of her was maybe she passed down just the hierarchy of being a grandmother, and the family gatherings and all of that kind of stuff. Just that that structure of hierarchy. is a byproduct that got passed down, but she never really said anything or anything like that. Did she ever give you advice that you still remember? Ugh, Medea said so much stuff. I can't, like I said, I can't remember because she was talking from the time you sat down till, she was still talking when you got up. So she might have said something uh in all of that. I just don't remember it, you know. Do you feel like she was the glue that held everyone together? Of course, she was the glue that held everybody together because she was the grandmother. She was the reason that everybody got together. She was the reason that you set a point. You set up something for that day. You know, on Mother's Day, you was at her house. It was like, here, whoever you with, give them a little something. Look, we're going to my grandmother's house. That I got to be there. Ain't no ifs, ands, or buts about that one. So yes, she was the glue that held everybody together. How did losing her uh, affect you? It it definitely was was a it definitely took a piece out of me because she was my grandmother. You definitely miss those people who are positive people in your life. The negative people you don't really miss, but the positive people, because there are so few of them, you miss the positive people when they pass. And especially your grandmothers, your favorite aunties, the people who had a definite impact on your life and 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 were part of that rhythm that you call life, the river that you call life. They were part of that. You know, it flowed through them. So yes, it did affect me when she passed. I remember it was a real quick story. It was funny. I was at work, and I usually don't break down like that, but there was a guy, and it actually taught me a lesson also. I was at work, and this guy, he asked me. I told him that my grandmother passed, and he just kind of kept mentioning it, and it wasn't really. Well, he didn't mean to do it, but you have to understand that when a family member passes or whoever passes and you keep asking them questions, that person is trying to hold it in, hold it together because they got to go to work. They got other stuff they got to do. They got to get ready for the funeral. They got to do this. They got to do that. And each time you ask that question about the person that passed, you're tugging on a string that they're trying to keep together. So he kind of kept asking me questions, and I kind of ended up breaking down. He turned around, and I broke down, you know, in tears, because it was just a crucial point for me with my grandmother dying. So it taught me a lesson that when I see somebody who has uh, somebody pass in their family, I just say, sorry for your loss. And I kind of leave it at that because I know what they're dealing with. Looking back, which grandparent relationship had the, the biggest impact on you? on who you are today, I would say probably my father's father. I think that he had the greatest impact on who I am today because being a man and just you know being able to recall him being a man and being I could be wrong because I didn't know him when he was younger, but as far as I knew, he was you know the definition of a man, you know, and for it's great for boys to see that because it gives them something, it gives them a memory that they can recall on when when they question or ignore their manhood. So they can never say that hey, I didn't know any better, because you had uh, at least one male figure around who who you didn't see every piece of uh, that manhood figure, but you saw basically enough that you could use it in your own life. So he was the one who had the biggest impact on who I am. At least the as far as grandparents are concerned, he had the biggest impact on who I am today.